To figure out why option C was the best in the last quiz, let's review the actual syntax rules in Java for defining a method. This is also known as the method signature. This is the method signature for the calculatePrice method that we saw earlier. You might be wondering why the order of the words are a certain way. Well, they follow a specific format, and it looks something like this. I know this looks really overwhelming, but don't worry, we're going to go through each one at a time. The first part in this method signature is the word private. This is known as the Java access modifier. It determines who has access to this method calculatePrice. The most common access modifiers that you'll see are public or private. This method is marked as private. That means that calculatePrice can only be called within other methods of the main activity. Outside of the main activity, like in other activities, you won't be able to call this method. It's private to the main activity. On the other hand, if you mark this as a public method, then anyone could call this method, whether you're inside the main activity or you're in other activities. It's kind of like this analogy. If you're a celebrity and public, then everyone knows about you. If you're private and you live inside your house all the time, then only a couple of people know you. So for the calculatePrice method, we're going to keep it private, so it's only used within the main activity. Next, we have int, which is the return data type. Do you remember our diagram from earlier where we said that when you call a method, you pass it inputs and you get an output back? Well, the return data type is the type of data that is returned in the output. And the data types we've learned about so far are int and string from the last lesson. This can also return an object data type, and we'll learn more about objects later in the lesson. In our case, this calculatePrice method is returning the total price of the order, which is an integer. In a social media app, if I had a method to get the number of friends I have on Facebook, it could return an integer, which is the number of friends. Next, we have the method name, which is calculatePrice in this case. Just like how we can refer to variables with their name, we can refer to methods with their name so that we can execute the instructions in this method. In the same documentation about defining methods, we can scroll to the bottom and see a section about naming methods. You can read about this in more detail later, but basically it says that method names should begin with a verb, like run or get or compare or set. It starts with a lowercase letter, and then you use camel case if there's multiple words. After the method name, we have the list of inputs, which are denoted within the opening and closing parentheses. You can have as many inputs as you want. If you don't want any inputs, you just have an empty set of parentheses. If you have one input, it looks like this. If you have multiple inputs, you just separate them with commas in between each input. Let's look at the case where we have one input, which is also known as an input parameter. We define an input parameter by specifying its data type and a variable name that we choose for it. So from the diagram of inputs and output, this is going to be the first input to the method. Within this method, then you can refer to the quantity variable, and it's just like any other variable where it already has a value inside of it. The value comes from when you initially called the method and you passed that input in. If we want to modify the method signature to add a second input param, we just have to specify the data type and the variable name for that second input param. Then within this method, we can refer to the quantity or price of 1 cup variables, just like the regular variables. When you call this method, you have to remember to pass the right number of inputs to the method that it's expecting, and the inputs must be of the right data type and in the right order. You can't flip the order of these, otherwise the method is going to interpret them incorrectly. After you list out your inputs, add a closing parentheses and then an opening brace. This starts the list of all the instructions within your method. After all of that, then just add a closing brace to mark the end of your method. Going back to our documentation, now this method declaration will make a lot more sense. First we have the access modifier, then we have a return data type, the method name, followed by the list of all the inputs. In this case, there are 4 different input parameters, and they each have a data type and a variable name. And then we have an opening brace, the list of all the instructions inside of it, and then a closing brace. And this is a method declaration. In this quiz, you'll have a chance to practice identifying the different parts of a method declaration. We're going to provide some code to you in the instructor notes. The code contains a bunch of methods that could appear in any app. For each case, can you tell me what is the method name, the list of input parameters, and the return data type? Let's do the sample together. Here's an example method. The goal is to create a custom greeting message based on the given name. The return value is going to be a greeting in the form of some text. Now let's ignore the comment for now. First we have the method name, which is in camel case here, and it says create custom greeting. Next we have the list of inputs. This is the first input parameter. The data type is string and the variable name is first name. Next we have the second input parameter. This is the data type and this is the variable name. And the two inputs are separated by a single comma, and they're enclosed within the opening and closing parentheses. Then we have the output here. The data type of the return value is string, because we want to return a greeting, which is a string. And this is what it looks like filled into the table. Now go ahead and fill in the blanks for the remaining three methods.